Okay, thanks for tuning in for episode 3 of Yough Talks. Today we are doing an episode on air quality with one of our partner organizations that some of you may have worked with us and them before, Environmental Health Project. I will let them introduce themselves, but we will be covering topics related to air quality, what you can do to protect yourself, and some tools that you can use to understand more about the air quality in your area. But I'll pass it to Nathan.
Great. Thank you, Em. Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Duran. I am the program manager here at the Environmental Health Project, and I am joined by my colleague Jackson Zeiler, the public health analyst from our team. Today, we're going to be talking about air quality, as Em mentioned, and here's a brief agenda of what we're going to go through today. I'm going to give you a very brief background about the Environmental Health Project, what we do, talk about major air pollutants and their health effects. I'm going to talk a little bit about air quality regulations, how the government and regulatory frameworks try to make sure that air quality is managed, limitations of those regulations where they fall short and where they could be improved. Jackson's going to go through our compounds of concern tool, which is a way to find out more information about additional air pollutants that aren't sort of these major ones that I'll be talking about. Then I'll be talking a little bit more about how to find more information about air quality issues in your area and a bit about how to protect your health in relation to air quality. So let's dive on in. The Environmental Health Project, or EHP, is a public health nonprofit organization founded in 2012. We largely work to defend public health in the face of oil and gas development. And you can see that we have worked around the country in the past 14 years to do this. Our work falls into three major categories. One is collecting and analyzing data about public health harms from this industry, and that is largely air quality data. We also do a great deal of health and wellness education, like what we're doing here today, to make sure that people understand how this industry and air quality more generally can impact health. We also do work in the policy and advocacy spaces to make sure that there are high quality, effective interventions that can help ensure communities that we work in and communities around the country and around the globe are able to, again, protect their health from pollution and from industry. We work with a wide array of folks, from people that live near oil and gas facilities to municipal leaders, state leaders, other nonprofits, public health researchers and professionals, and at times industry representatives as well. We've worked around all kinds of shale gas infrastructure, from the extraction at well pads to where gas is moved through compressor stations and pipelines, to processing plants like cryogenic facilities, to its end use, either in power plants, in petrochemical plants to make plastics, or in LNG plants or terminals to power a variety of different machines. And as well as its waste facilities. There is a fair bit of waste associated with this industry that also creates air, water, and soil pollution. I've been talking about shale gas development, and our organization largely works around, fracking and oil and gas development. But air pollution and air quality is something that is affected by a wide array of different sources. And in our work around oil and gas, we have amassed a great deal of expertise and experience in dealing with air quality and air pollution issues, which we're excited to be able to share with you today. So I'm going to go through some of the health effects of the major air pollutants that impact human health. And as a way to sort of ground ourselves in this conversation, I wanted to bring up the emissions of a facility that is in the area of Mountain Watershed Association's work, the Tonasco Westmoreland Generating Station. And this is the emissions that the Tonasco Westmoreland Generating Station, which is a gas-fired power plant in Westmoreland County, that they reported to the Pennsylvania state government for the 2024 calendar year. And you'll see here we have a variety of different pollutants. We have two kinds of particulate matter. We have nitrogen and sulfur oxides, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs. All of these are things I'm going to talk a bit about, but we also have carbon dioxide as well. Carbon dioxide, not something that we're particularly concerned about in terms of how it impacts the people that breathe it, but it is something that does impact climate and is important to keep track of as well because of that. So these are the kinds of pollutants we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to dive on in here about particulate matter. So particulate matter is really little bits of stuff, right? We can see in this graphic here that the stuff that it's little bits of is incredibly small, right? So we're talking about with fine particulate matter, which is PM 2.5, which is less than 2.5 microns in diameter, these little purple balls here. It is a fraction of a fraction of the width of a human hair. They're incredibly tiny, but they are, solid matter. And because they're solid and so tiny, they can get very deep into your lungs and impact your health by sort of getting into your bloodstream. These tiny bits of particulate matter come from a variety of sources, including combustion of a wide variety. When you burn stuff, you're going to get particulate matter. It also comes from dust formation and secondary formation. Secondary formation is when other pollutants are emitted from a source and then they react in the atmosphere to form particulate matter. So this is sometimes called condensable particulate matter, where gases combine and condense into little bits of stuff that we call particulate matter. And that secondary formation can happen from ammonia, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides reacting. The health impacts of particulate matter are wide-ranging, and we care a lot about particulate matter because more than any other air pollutant, it is the most impactful to human health across the globe. No other air pollutant causes as much human health harm as particulate matter. Particulate matter kills more people every year than any other air pollutant. And so that's one of the main reasons we talk, and you may hear a lot about particulate matter. It does impact human health in a variety of different ways through respiratory diseases, so chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, through asthma, and other lung issues. It has cardiovascular health impacts, so it can increase your risk of heart attack. Neurological health impacts can increase your risk for some neurodegenerative diseases, and it is known to cause cancer. So this is a very important one to be aware of and to be able to know how to protect yourself against. In terms of some good news, though, I wanted to share some of these trends over the years. We have seen, and this is sort of across the board with many of these major pollutants, the PM 2.5 across the country is getting better. The annual average level of PM 2.5 in the atmosphere continues to drop, and you can see from 2000 to 2024, there was a 46% decrease in the national average amount of PM 2.5 in the air. That doesn't mean that there aren't local sources that you need to keep track of and be aware of to be able to protect your health as well. The second pollutant on that list was nitrogen oxides. So nitrogen oxides are a set of nitrogen-based compounds that come, again, from a variety of sources, but largely combustion, again. The biggest source of nitrogen oxides are motor vehicle exhaust, but they also come from burning fossil fuels more generally. There are additionally a few industrial processes listed here that generate nitrogen oxides over and above just burning fossil fuels. Nitrogen oxides have some primary health impact if you breathe them in, largely respiratory health impacts. They can lead to, asthma exacerbations. But one of the main reasons that they're tracked and regulated by the federal government is that they go on to form ground level ozone, which is a very important air pollutant as well, fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, and acid rain. So I don't have a slide about ozone, but ozone is another important air pollutant to, keep in your mind, because ozone, if PM 2.5 is the air pollutant that has the most health impact, ozone is the air pollutant that has the second greatest health impact to human health. So ozone is also very important, but nothing emits ozone, right? Facilities only emit things that go on and form ozone in the atmosphere. So it's not something that you're ever going to see in terms of like a particular facility is emitting ozone because it only ever comes from the combination of other compounds like nitrogen oxides mixing in the atmosphere to form ozone, which is sometimes called smog. Nitrogen dioxide, as we can also see, has decreased significantly over the years with a 66% decrease in the national average nitrogen dioxide levels from 1980 through to 2024. The next compound here is sulfur dioxide. This is something that comes largely from burning coal and oil, coal being the largest source of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. Something here in southwestern Pennsylvania we are familiar with and deal with more so than other parts of the country because of the coal history and the coal infrastructure that's been built out. But there are additional sources like copper smelting and volcanic eruptions. If there are volcanoes that impact sort of global air quality, then a lot of that can be sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide has additional respiratory effects. So if you breathe it in, you're more likely to go to the hospital for COPD exacerbations, and you're more likely to have asthma exacerbations. But it also goes on to form fine particulate matter as well. We can see that the trends on SO2 are incredibly dramatic with the average amount that we're seeing across the country decreasing 95% from 1980 through 2024. So this is something that the regulatory setup has done a pretty good job of addressing over time. Carbon monoxide is another one of the main pollutants here. And carbon monoxide is something that a lot of people are familiar with. We have carbon monoxide detectors in our home, right? And this is something that comes from incomplete fuel combustion. So if you're, burning gasoline, if you're burning wood, and it doesn't fully burn, then you're going to get some carbon monoxide that's coming off of that. Too much carbon monoxide can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning, which is deadly. But lesser amounts of carbon monoxide can also lead to headache, nausea, and heart failure. As with the other compounds we've been looking at, we can also see that there's been a steep decline in carbon monoxide over the years with 87% decrease in the national average amount of carbon monoxide from 1980 through 2024. The last main air pollutant I'm going to talk about here are volatile organic compounds. This was on that big list of compounds coming from Tenaska Generating Station. And it's one number that they provide, right? But volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, are a diverse set of gases. There's a list of examples here like benzene, toluene, formaldehyde, 1,3-butadiene. There's dozens of these, right? Some of them are incredibly dangerous in small amounts. Some of them, like acetone, which many people know as nail polish remover, might not smell all that great, but take a large amount to start having any primary health effect. So one of the issues with VOCs is that they're so different that it can be really difficult with just one single VOC number to say, okay, how dangerous is this, right? But VOCs are tracked as an aggregated number because of the fact that they go on to form ozone in the atmosphere. So reducing overall VOCs is a way to reduce ozone as well. VOCs come, as many of these do, from a variety of different sources. A combustion, again, of almost all fossil fuels and wood, manufactured chemicals, gas and gasoline all generate volatile organic compounds. And gas and gasoline will, VOCs will evaporate off of natural gas and gasoline without them even being burned. Health impacts of VOCs, aside from forming ozone, include impacts to your lungs, your heart, neurological systems, as well as causing cancer. And these health effects and health impacts can vary drastically depending on what individual VOC we're talking about, which we'll get more into later. So coming back to the Tenaska Westmoreland emissions here, we can see that all of these different compounds that we just discussed, which are called criteria air pollutants, are emitted in some amount, right? And some of these numbers look pretty big when we're talking about tons, right? So 117 tons of nitrogen oxides in a year seems like a fair bit. And, over 2 million tons of carbon dioxide is certainly a lot of CO2. But when we're looking at these numbers, it's hard to put the numbers into perspective. And it's also important to think about, okay, where are these going and how are they regulated? So there are some existing regulations in place that are meant to protect communities and the country at large from excess air pollution. And all of these that I'm going to be talking about are under the United States Clean Air Act. So these are federal regulations. And there are three main ones that I'm going to mention briefly here. The first is National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. There's the Title V program for large emitters, and the new source performance standards, which are applied to specific industries. The NAAQS regulates the 6 criteria pollutants, five that I didn't go over lead. So we have particulate matter, fine and coarse. We have carbon monoxide. We have lead, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone. Lead is included in here as it is a heavy metal, which is particularly problematic when it's airborne, but lead issues are in very specific locations and not generally something that is a concern across the entire country. So under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the United States EPA determines for each compound how much is okay, and then figures out if any particular area is within attainment of that standard. So for instance, for fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, the annual average NAAQS standard is 9 micrograms per cubic meter, which is just the unit they use to measure it. And if an area has an annual average over 9 micrograms per cubic meter, then it's out of attainment of that National Ambient Air Quality Standard. To determine attainment, they use monitors and air quality modeling to determine that for usually counties or sometimes parts of counties. And this image here shows where there are monitors near the area the Mountain Watershed Association works in. And we can see that while there are a fair bit of monitors, particularly in the Mon Valley up near Clariton, once we get sort of, we'll say, upriver on the Yough, we are seeing sort of fewer and fewer monitors around. There's lesser density there, which is a concern. So once an attainment determination is made, either based on these monitors or these monitors in addition to some modeling that state governments are done, the state Department of Environmental Protection puts together a plan to reduce pollution in non-attainment areas. And what that plan usually does is require emitters in and around those non-attainment areas to use better pollution control technologies. These are the different kinds, or rather categories, of pollution control technologies that can be required. I'm not going to go deep into these, but suffice to say, when emissions or ambient pollution levels are outside of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, state regulators require emitters in the area to put in better pollution controls. There are other regulations as well, as I mentioned. So we have maximum available control technologies, and these are for major hazardous air pollutant sources. And hazardous air pollutants and criteria air pollutants are handled a bit differently, but many hazardous air pollutants are individual VOCs. So if you emit a lot of a single VOC, if you're a chemical manufacturer, for instance, then this might be something that applies to you. There's also the Title V requirement, which is requirements for particularly large emitters, like the Westmoreland Tenaska plant. And this requires certain reporting and pollution control technologies. It requires stack testing, and it allows for the United States EPA to come in and make sure that everything is running as it should and enforce these requirements if need be. Lastly, we have new source performance standards, which is the EPA's way to ensure that particular industries, for instance, Coke ovens is a big one for new source performance standards, are operating in a way that is reducing their emissions as much as deemed economically viable. So there's a lot going on in new source performance standards that is looking at, okay, what's the state of the technology and what is reasonable to expect a operator might be able to install. And as with all of these, states are sort of the ones that are implementing new source performance standards with the United States EPA performing oversight. So those are some of the regulations that help those trends go down, right? So these regulations, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards in particular, have been effective in reducing overall average levels of pollution across the country. But that doesn't mean it's perfect, right? The determination of National Ambient Air Quality Standards attainment can be a little tricky with how few and far between monitors sometimes are. And a lot of those monitors are explicitly placed far away from industrial emitters. They're not trying necessarily to look at, how much pollution is coming off this power plant, but rather what is this general area experiencing? So people that live really close to large industrial emitters might be sort of left out of consideration a bit with this framework. There's also a time frame issue where national ambient air quality standards use sort of longer term averages to determine if a place is too polluted, which is generally a good way of doing things, but it can lead to short-term impacts receiving less attention and less intervention from regulators. And short-term, spikes in all of these air pollutants that we've talked about can cause real harm to people, right? It can lead to asthma attacks. It can lead to trips to the hospital. It can, cause premature death. It is important to still um, look at and be mindful of short-term impacts, even if some of the health effects on the longer-term impacts, things like cancer and all-cause mortality, are also incredibly important. Responsiveness of these regulations, these are long-term processes and can be sort of difficult to react quickly to community health concerns. And there's also an enforcement issue here with these regulations, where a lot of the information that regulators use is self-reported by operators of pollution generating facilities, right? They say, hey, we pumped out this much PM 2.5 into the atmosphere last year. And there is, some testing that's required, but a lot of that is sort of taking them at their word, which can go awry at times. And there are additionally unregulated emissions. So there are individual compounds that aren't well taken into account in this framework. And there are emissions during specific activities, startup, shutdown, maintenance, and malfunction events, or SSMMs, that aren't going to contribute to a particular facility's emissions limits in their permit. So that can be another issue that isn't really well addressed by these regulations. Going back to the Westmoreland Generating Station from Tanasca, here's a list of some non-criteria pollutants that are also noted to be emitted from that facility. So these are these are almost all volatile organic compounds that are emitted, but don't have national ambient air quality standards associated with them, right? And some of these have confusing names, can really be sort of difficult to understand and find a lot of information on. So to that end, I'm going to pass things over to Jackson to talk a bit about our compounds of concern tool that provides information about these kinds of compounds.
That's good. Thank you, Nathan. I'm Jackson Zeiler, the public health analyst with EHP, and I also have some slides to share just about the compounds of concern tool that EHP has developed. One of the many tools that we have recently developed um, just as a result of different modeling that we found and requests from community members. This kind of came from a mix of that concern. So, uh, kind of just to run through quickly what we're going to look at here, sort of a sub agenda within Nathan's agenda is what the tool is, why we need it, a little bit of how we made it, the methodology, which I think kind of lends a little bit of information as far as what it does and doesn't do, and then as indicated, a quick demonstration. So we've essentially taken a bunch of those air pollutants that might not be well characterized that Nathan had mentioned, and turned them into and inputted them into an interactive database that now sits at over 60 air pollutants, mainly from industrial emissions, and it pairs it with the health and exposure information available on them. We used publicly available peer-reviewed data from multiple different sources and aggregated them together um, with the goal of individuals coming to this tool not needing to go to those disparate databases in separate website windows and having to get that information all together. It's all here in one place for you. And so we collate that information together to make it accessible for frontline communities and organizations. And so with the nature of the tool and the way that we collected all that information, we're able to search the tool by chemical name or by the organ system that it affects, or even the known symptoms or health effects that they primarily are associated with. Why we need it, Nathan kind of covered that in this regulatory limitation section. However, the main reason for needing this tool is that, as we know, these polluting industries emit various various pollutants from PM 2.5 to VOCs to HAPs that were thoroughly covered before this. And then this is kind of the list of main industries that we look at with this tool. We know that these pollutants have a demonstrable effect on health for the populations that live nearby. But because we don't know necessarily from, for example, from a permit, an air permit, a facility may just list VOC generally that they're going to anticipate emitting, but not have to speciate exactly which ones those are. So because we don't know that, we don't know the full extent of the exposure from these facilities. So this tool helps to identify some of those compounds, their risks, and their known health effects to better understand that exposure. And then quickly, kind of where we got this information. As I'd mentioned, we mainly used these three different databases: PubChem, the ATSDR toxicological profiles, and then the EPA's Integrated Risk System, or IRIS. So we've taken information on the right-hand side here, short-term, long-term health effects, target organs and symptoms, primarily from PubChem and the tox profiles. And then from IRIS, we've extracted things like reference concentrations, carcinogenic potential, minimal risk levels. So instead of one person having to go to three of these different areas to get that information, we put it all into one system database. So now I will get into the tool demonstration here. Switch my window here. Are we seeing the HP homepage still or no? Or still my slides?
Still your slides.
Alrighty. Here we go. Is this the homepage now?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Okay. So to get to our tool, you can go to the Environmental Health Project website, environmentalhealthproject.org. Lots of great information here if you do have the time to check it out. But for the moment, we'll go over to the tools section and then scroll down to compounds of concern, which will open this the tool itself. Sometimes takes a couple of seconds to load. More than a couple of seconds to load today. And the first thing we'll get here is our medical disclaimer, which importantly says that this is not, we don't provide medical advice, and that any concerns on a medical front, you should consult a medical professional with. And it's not intended to diagnose or treat any sorts of medical conditions. So that is a disclaimer that we want to communicate here as well. But to get into the tool itself, we'll click on this big green compounds of concern button, and then we'll be in the tool. So a couple of things that we'll see here. On the left-hand side is this, the human figure with all the different target organ systems. In a minute, I'll kind of go through, um, I like to go through a couple of the scenarios of how, someone might approach this tool. But just, for the first example, let's just say exactly the compound that you're interested in learning more about. Um, for example, when you're like ethylbenzene that was mentioned previously on one of the slides, we can, if we know we're searching for, that specific compound, selecting it here on the right side in this details area, it will populate all the information that we've gathered on ethylbenzene. So these categories kind of drop down here. You can see the exact target organs that are affected, that ethylbenzene targets. And this is again from databases like PubChem and the ATSDR that we've just put here for like easy access. We looked at all the symptoms here that are expected from inhalation exposure to ethylbenzene here. So those are some of the symptoms that are expected from the literature that we understand exposure is causes. Pathways of exposure generally is only going to be inhalation, as that's the main approach that we've been looking at for approaching these chemicals at the moment. This health risk area is largely going to be a lot of maybe the most informative section. It's going to indicate whether the compound is carcinogenic, and this is from the IARC, which is the International Agency um, on forget the full acronym, but they are a WHO sub branch that looks at carcinogenic compounds and determines whether or not um, there is carcinogenic potential in each compound. And they rate it, from definitely yes to possibly or probably or not carcinogenic just based on the evidence that exists. So ethylbenzene gets a possible in that the evidence that allows us to understand whether or not something's carcinogenic is not strong enough for us to give a full-throated like yes determination, but it still has that carcinogenic potential. The reference concentrations and minimal risk levels here are essentially going to tell you the minimum amount that you could be exposed to daily without significant risks of health effects manifesting. And where available, we provide this. A lot of the compounds do not have both, just from that determination has not been made by the bodies that calculate these. So if that's not there, we'll indicate that as well. But largely, each one has at least a reference concentration or a minimal risk level. And this can be useful if you have your own air monitoring and you're approaching this tool. I have air monitoring that's reading higher than 1 microgram per liter cubed of ethylbenzene in my air. That could indicate that you're above that exposure level, for example. So that's that health risk category there. And then here's our, the source of the pollutant. Largely, this is from PubChem as well. So ethylbenzene is sourced very broad categories from paints and solvents, from industrial processes to this longer list of industrial sectors. And each of these you can kind of click on. It'll take you to that PubChem area where you can get a little bit more information, but we just wanted to provide a general source of a lot of these compounds. Uses, ethylbenzene doesn't have them, but this is going to be the consumer source category in PubChem. So if there's any consumer uses here, they should appear. And then this is the evidence. It's just all our links to both IRIS and the ATSDR that we used to come up with all this information about. And then there's like a wider glossary of terms if you need clarification on any of the terms that we use. But let's say that you're not, fully knowledgeable of the compounds that you might be affected by. You didn't know it was ethylbenzene. You can choose, like a system here that would be, might be affected. So like the lymphatic system will give you a much shorter list of all the compounds that are known to affect the lymphatic system. But even more refined filters exist kind of down below here. So for example, you want to look at compounds that for sure are a yes carcinogenic, like without a doubt exposure above a certain amount is carcinogenic. And then you want to look at some symptoms. What are some general ones? If you do too many, it'll eliminate a lot of the options, but like dizziness and headache, I think are very common. So yeah, that'll give you a shorter list. These are all compounds that are carcinogenic or known to be carcinogenic from the IARC at least, and that do so their symptoms include headache, and or dizziness. So a lot of familiar names there from our previous slides from Nathan. Kind of a heavy hitters list here, honestly, like benzene, 1,3-butadiene, vinyl chloride, all very known carcinogenic compounds. Um, so clicking on each one, that'll give you that information again. But another kind of useful item here is rendering the report for each of these compounds, and this will essentially take all of this information in the details category and put it into a more refined sort of printable format, or you can keep it on your phone, um, or take it for your take it to a doctor, anything that you might be using this information for, whether you're testifying or something like that, and you need this quick reference. It's going to give you all that same information in just a couple pages. Just a couple pages there. Last thing I kind of wanted to look at to kind of show here is back on this homepage. Go to the contact us section. There's ways to provide feedback. You can send us an email, take our little feedback survey here as well. But I always like to draw attention to this add a compound area where you can actually request a compound to be reviewed by us if you didn't see it on that list already. We right now go through lists from different, federal agencies of compounds that are of concern. And as we work down a list, we find new ones, but we prioritize community input ones. So if you do submit one here, it'll be shot to the top of our review list and then added usually within 2 weeks. And yeah, the other items here are the resources, which gives a better detail of our methodology, if that is of interest to you. That kind of wraps up the demo. And if you did have questions, again, the contact us section to email us is there as well, and we'd be happy to answer any questions for you. I think I'll throw it back to Nathan.
Great, thank you, Jackson. I'm going to finish up here with some places to find some more information, some information about protecting your health, and then we'll have some time for some questions. So to find more information about particular facilities in your areas and what they might be emitting, if you want to use the compounds of concern tool, or keep track of any of the criteria air pollutants that I previously covered, there's a variety of ways to do that. You can find out information about emissions through permits. So Pennsylvania has a pretty comprehensive permit search interface that you can get on the PADET's website. These slides will be made available after the webinar so that you are able to click on these links. And you can also look at emissions inventories, which are reported emissions. So the permit says you can't emit more than this, and the emissions inventory say, okay, this is what we actually emitted. So those have a bit of a lag time. We were looking at 2024 emissions, for instance. There's also, if you don't even know what sort of emitters might be near you, there's a lot of really good maps out there that can help you figure out, okay, what kinds of industrial emitters might I want to sort of keep my eye on as I go about my days? State regulators have good maps. Here we have them for Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. And fractracker.org, a partner organization of ours, has a lot of really good state and national infrastructure maps that really often go into more detail than what the state maps will provide you. So they often will have smaller things. They'll have, gas pipelines and things like that that won't necessarily be on the state maps. But can be sources of emissions near you. So if you're ever in doubt, you can always go to the fractracker.org maps page, which is linked here, to take a look at that. And then at the Environmental Health Project, we have these facility level maps that we can generate that show, on average, where do pollutants coming from a specific facility end up, right? If you're in a particularly flat area, this is basically a map of concentric circles, where the closer you are, the more emissions you're going to experience from a particular site. But if you're in complex topography, if you're in sort of river valleys and hills and so on, as is normal in our region, then these sort of emissions dispersion maps can take some pretty odd shapes where, if you're over the ridge in sort of the next valley, you may very rarely see emissions from a facility, even though you're pretty close as the crow flies, whereas somebody much further away, but in a similar airshed to the facility, might get more of those emissions. So existing maps are at this link, and there is also a request form if you would like a map for a facility that we have not made one for yet. And I have some examples of some other emitters in the area that Mountain Watershed does work, just as sort of examples that, these facilities can have, a wide variety of different profiles, right? Tanaska, for instance, had a lot of all of the pollutants, but CK Composites Company in Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, you can see has almost no emissions for most of them, except for VOCs, right? So if you lived near this particular company, you wouldn't really be all that concerned about most of the compounds that we talked about today, except for those things in the VOCs, which may lead you to go and need to think about that compounds of concern tool. Another example here is the Texas Eastern Compressor Station in Accident, Maryland, where we can see, pretty low levels of particulate matter and sulfur oxides, but a good number of VOCs, nitrogen oxides, and carbon monoxide. And this is pretty standard for a compressor station, and there are a lot of compressor stations that move gas around in this area. So compressor stations, sometimes people are very tuned into what they're doing. Some people are sort of used to them, but there are things to keep in mind and stay aware of, that they can have significant impacts on air quality. So when you're going about your days and you're like, okay, I've heard a bit about air quality and I know that it can impact my health. What can I do to protect myself? What can I do to protect my family, right? So one of the major things you can do is simply pay attention to weather and air quality forecasts. Airnow.gov, which is run through the federal government, does provide air quality forecasts at airnow.gov. And you can type in your zip code or town, and it will provide you an air quality forecast if there is one. And they get the air quality forecasts from the Pennsylvania DEP. If airnow.gov does not have an air quality forecast for you, many weather apps now have air quality forecasts built into them. Things like the Weather Channel, AccuWeather, those sorts of apps can usually provide you an air quality forecast for the next day. Keeping windows closed at night is, I know, a sort of annoying, perhaps, suggestion to hear, but at night is often when air is very stagnant and pollutants can accumulate near their emission source. So if you live particularly close to something that emits pollution, then keeping your windows closed at night can help you and your family stay safe from any emissions that are being generated at night. Some emissions are only going to be emitted during the day, right? If it's a facility that is only sort of operating during the day, then this might not be as important to you. And often those air quality forecasts will talk specifically about overnight weather as well. You can use an air purifier. This is a great way to make sure that your air quality is staying healthy in your home. The Austin Air HealthMate is a very high quality and a bit costly option that EHP recommends. Raucous, Reducing Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces, another partner organization, also offers a DIY low-cost fan filter that can do a lot of the same things for a fraction of the cost. And you can click the link here to find out how to do that. We also have a list of recommendations about how to remove avoidable indoor air pollutants that we'll let you read on your own time if you are so interested. And, one of the big things that I've started doing and have seen its impact is, vacuuming instead of sweeping your bare floors. This, instead of dust and all the things on your floors going up into the air when using a broom, the vacuum, particularly a bagged vacuum, is a good way of making sure that, those potentially airborne contaminants go outside, go in the trash instead of back up into the air where you can breathe them. Another important thing that you can do to protect your health is to keep a health diary. Do you note any symptoms that you're having, things like headaches, asthma attacks, sore throat, redness of the eyes or skin, things like this that could be symptoms of exposure to air pollution? It's a good idea to mark down when and where that happened and any sort of conditions that were going on at that time. What was the weather like? Was there anything you noticed around you? Did you hear something? Did you smell something? Um, all of that can be helpful in trying to figure out, potentially in collaboration with your doctor, what could be leading to this. Is it environmental or might it be something else? We have a variety of resources available at our website, including a resource that has tips for talking to your healthcare provider about air quality issues. And we have links here to airni.gov and the Purple Air map. So Purple Air are low-cost air quality monitors that are deployed across Western Pennsylvania, as well as in West Virginia and Maryland, that allow you to see in real time what levels of PM2.5 are near you. And it can be helpful if you want to say, hey, air quality, what's it doing right now? Should I go out for a run? Should I let my kids out to play? That sort of thing. So I think we'll leave it there and hopefully have some time for a few questions here. Here is some contact info for us. Really appreciate Mountain Watershed having us and excited to hear what questions we have.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was so informative and so much information in a short time. So thank you, thank you, thank you for coming and talking to us about this extremely important subject. But yeah, we do have a couple questions. First, data centers are top of mind for everyone right now. And we had questions about what would a data center, if there are several that we've heard rumors about in our watershed, and there were questions about how would a data center that is proposed in the Yough and river valleys and so on, how does that impact air quality and how could it impact the Yough? And is there any overlap between air pollution and water pollution?
Yeah, it's a big question, a question that Jackson and I have been working on recently. And, in terms of air quality from a data center project, one of the first questions that are really important to answer is how the data center is getting its electricity. So some data center projects plug into the grid, like your house does, and the electricity is coming from a power plant somewhere, right? And so the impact that those kinds of data centers are going to have on air quality is going to be limited to their emergency generators. And without fail, they will have a large number of emergency generators on site, particularly if they are plugging into the grid. And those emergency generators, depending on the size of the facility, there can be a lot of them, right? Usually they run on diesel fuel, and the hope is that they don't run very often at all, right? But we have seen increasingly that grid operators ask facilities like data centers that have large numbers of diesel generators to run those generators when the grid is experiencing heavy strain. So this is often during the height of summer when everyone is trying to use air conditioning. Those, 100, 200 diesel generators on the roof or next to the data center could be turned on just to provide additional power to the grid or to power the data center so that the grid doesn't have to, not necessarily during an emergency, even though they're called emergency generators. And diesel generators, more so than a lot of other kinds of power generation, produce some nasty air pollutants. They produce, in particular, what's called ultrafine particulate matter. So we're looking at PM 2.5, which is this really small stuff. Ultrafine is even tinier. So it's 25 times smaller than PM 2.5. And that stuff is pound for pound much more harmful to your health if you're breathing it in. So we don't want those emergency generators being relied on regularly. And if it's in the bottom of a river valley, you can have an air inversion which traps any of those emissions from those diesel generators near the ground, particularly at night and in the pre-dawn hours. And keep those communities exposed to the diesel generator exhaust longer than we would like. Other facilities, particularly very large data centers, may have on-site generation, basically a power plant on-site, usually run by gas, that is generating power for the site. And in that situation, we'd have all the same concerns that we would have in any other gas-fired power plant, like at Tenaska Westmoreland or the many other gas power plants in the region. So they would emit, PM, they would have VOCs associated with them. Just about everything that we talked about could come from those kinds of data center projects. How they tie into water, there's often with data center projects sort of a trade-off where um, a particular project can either prioritize reducing the amount of water it requires or reducing the amount of electricity it requires. And it's really hard or really expensive to do both, right? So one of the ways you can reduce your water consumption is by using more electricity and vice versa. So if there are concerns around water quality, it is important to make sure that the operators are not sort of shifting the pollution burden or the burden on the community from water to air. And if they are, that everyone is sort of aware of what's happening and going into that situation with open eyes and any information that's necessary to make sure that it's an informed decision that the community is taking. Hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yes, that's a very comprehensive answer, and some parts of it very scary, but but it's good to know, So and then about like air pollution just in general, does air pollution ever impact rivers and waterways? Like the compounds and chemicals and so on that are emitted from these facilities, is there any interaction between air pollution that can, become water pollution? And then my other general air pollution question is, does it have to be smelly to be harmful? It's always like we can notice when like we drive past, the Clairton Coke Works, you can smell it, and we know there are harmful compounds coming out of that. But is smell always a good indicator of whether the air is harmful?
Yeah, two great questions. You know, in terms of air pollution impacting water, a lot of processes that generate air pollution also generate water pollution, right? Um, when you are extracting gas from a fracking well, you're making produced water, right? The water that went down into the well and comes back up. So you're going to have VOCs coming out of that well as produced water. Um, so the ways that air pollution is generated often also produce water pollution. But most of the air pollution that we deal with these days isn't going to be something that like falls to the ground and can
Yeah.
seep into water, right? So it's that water pollution that's generated at the same time as the air pollution that we're more concerned about than, air pollution that's in the air sort of coming down to the ground and getting into waterways. That was certainly an issue, in the 80s and 90s with acid rain, but that has, particularly in this region, become less and less of a concern as time has gone on. And your second question was around smell. So smell is a great indicator that there's something going on, but that doesn't mean if it doesn't smell, everything is fine, right? So there are plenty of compounds, PM 2.5 and ozone, the two most important air pollutants for human health, are odorless, right? So there can be plenty of PM 2.5 in there can be plenty of ozone in the air, and you're not necessarily going to be able to smell it. If it's incredibly high, there's sometimes a bit of an ozone smell that you can get, but usually levels way below what you can smell are going to be starting to impact your health. So if there's something that you can smell, it's definitely an indication that like I need to be aware of what's happening and maybe check some sources of information of what air quality is like right now. I might want to look around for what this smell might be connected to in terms of particular compounds that might be included in compounds of concern, even though we don't have specific odors in that tool. But just because you're not smelling something doesn't mean it's definitively safe.
Gotcha.
To
And
kind of add on to that, I know that in occupational health settings, odor thresholds are sometimes used for, like safety and exposure information. And a lot of the times, those odor thresholds exceed the minimum levels that I had kind of discussed on the tool demonstration. So by the time for some of these industrial chemicals, and this is again largely in occupational settings, some of the times if you're smelling those compounds, it's already well above like a threshold of of that exposure. So that's something to be aware of. I would certainly seek out whether those odor thresholds for certain compounds, if you can identify what it is, see what those are in comparison to what the minimum effect level is. But again, it is kind of hard to, unless you know like what that compound is, it's going to be hard to probably pull out exactly what that is, which becomes a problem. That's just something I was just wanted to bring up from like the occupational health side of things.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the other way around too, right? Where the odor threshold is much lower than the concern level, right? It's not always, if you can smell it, it's a problem. Sometimes it's well past, as Jackson said, the cause for concern, and it's really bad. Or sometimes it's like, okay, it needs to be a lot worse than this for it to become an issue. So, knowing which compound it is sort of a lot of the battle there.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's very good information. Then my last couple of questions are about like how can we protect ourselves, I suppose, or like ways to reduce air pollution. Now we know industrial polluters are the largest and most serious source of air pollution, but is there anything that we can do as individuals to help reduce air pollution? And additionally, are there any natural, I suppose, solutions like, increasing green spaces or planting trees? Do things like that help air pollution? Are there particular plants that, we would, if I'm worried about if I live near an industrial facility, is there anything that I can do on my property? Hope that question makes sense.
Yeah, that's I haven't actually had it put exactly that way to me before, and I think we could look a bit more into that if there are particular sort of plants. But I can say that by and large, having and being surrounded by green space and plants are going to be beneficial for your air quality. The best thing that you can have between you and an industrial emitter is a forest. That is going to be what is going to provide the greatest buffer between you and that facility based on its air pollution. And some of that is physical of like blocking the wind. Some of that is that there are other compounds that they're called biogenic emissions, so emissions that come from plants that will sort of interact with pollution and sort of help tamp it down. But in terms of plants that you can plant on your property, that I don't know of, but I can look into it because that's an interesting question, and I'd be curious myself. In terms of other things that people can do to reduce emissions, a lot of the big things are around like electrification, right? So inside your home, if you have a gas stove, or if you are using a wood burner for heat in the winter, or we talk with people that still have coal boilers in their house, right? You swap that out for an electric furnace, or if you're able to buy a new range and oven that are electric. I recognize that's a big expense, but that can go a long way into reducing the emissions that you're dealing with. And really in particular, if anyone is still heating their home with a coal boiler, I would really urge you to look into any local programs that may be in your area from your power company, to get you some new equipment, because we've had air quality monitors located at people's homes that heat their homes with coal in the winter, and it's really troubling the amount of pollution that introduces really hyper locally, right? It's not going to travel very far, but it's really going to concentrate around your home, and that's something that we want to avoid if at all possible. Other ways to avoid air pollution would be to make sure you're not idling vehicles near your home. That's a big thing. Not only like cars and trucks, but tractors, any sort of farm equipment, leaf blowers and lawn mowers, any like small two-stroke engines like that can emit a lot of sort of uncontrolled emissions that are also going to, add up over time. So those would be other things that I would suggest, thinking about, does this need to idle here? Or can I turn off the engine?
Awesome. Well, those are all of my questions. And I just want to say thank you guys again. This was so informative and there was so much information covered in just an hour. So we definitely appreciate it. You guys taking the time to be here today. And yeah, I don't know if you have any closing comments that you would like to add, but again, just to repeat that we are so appreciative and hope that everyone finds it interesting as I did.
Thanks so much for having us, and we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and the folks that you work with. And if you need any additional resources or anything from us, you can visit our website at environmentalhealthproject.org. My email address is nduran, DERON, at environmentalhealthproject.org. And we're always happy to help folks that need information, have concerns about air quality. And yeah, just thanks again.